Hi class. This video is the lab for adding interface sounds to our Godot project. Interface sounds are sounds that you hear that are related to user interface objects like the buttons or scenes. So we're just going to add a couple here. It'll be pretty simple. We're going to create the sounds either using JFXR, our sound creation program, or freesound.org, where we can download Creative Commons licensed sounds. We'll make some sounds for game over and winning the game, as well as for button hover and click. And then we'll add those into Godot. And so we'll quickly go over adding an audio stream player and then changing the code to make the sounds play. We won't be writing any new code, but we're just going to be editing some code that already exists that will make the sound play once we have added the sound in. Of course, we'll do some documentation. We will post either the sound files themselves or links to our resources on the Open Lab. A few other resources in here: the audio stream player documentation, SFXR, which is an audio generation program that is available for Windows, which JFXR is based on, and Audacity, which you can use to edit sounds. It's a free audio editing program. You're probably familiar with it if you've taken MMP 100. So let's get started. So we'll get started in JFXR. JFXR is a JavaScript version of a program called SFXR, which was designed to generate sound effects for video games. That program is for the Windows platform, and I'll link to that in the description in case you want to download it and use it on your computer. I'm using JFXR because it's in the browser, so it's very easy to share and everybody can use it on any different computer. But this program has been ported into a bunch of different languages, so you can use it on different machines. So JFXR generates sounds in the 8-bit style of retro video games. If you've already done the gameplay sound effects lab, you're probably familiar with this, but I'm going to go over it again in case you haven't. Basically, JFXR has a bunch of different categories where you can select sort of random default sounds like jump or pickup or laser or explosion, things that you might expect to see in a game. And then you can play with the parameters yourself or click the mutate button to make random mutations to get new versions of those sounds. And once you get something that you like, you can download and it'll make a WAV file for you. So it's very convenient for generating sound effects and game sounds. So we're going to start by making some UI sounds, and the blip select default is a good one to use for this. This is sort of like if you select something on a menu, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing. We want a couple sounds for when we hover over a button. We want a sound to reflect that event so the player knows that something happened. And then of course, when you click on the button, we want another sound to kind of confirm the button click. So I'll try some different sounds for each one of those, but I think blip select is a good default to start from. And then I can make some adjustments using the different parameters. You can see there's a lot of parameters in JFXR. I probably don't have time to go into depth on how each one works, so I recommend just playing around with each one of those and seeing what the differences are. One of my favorites to try is the waveform selector. You can see the different types of waveforms, and that will change the quality of the sound. The first waveform, the sine wave, is going to be sort of clean and kind of round and nice sounding. And then as the waveforms become more straight or jagged, you'll get more of a distorted or sort of computery sounding effect. And there's also noise added in some of the other waveforms. So you can get a lot of different effects just by choosing different waveforms. Another parameter that is good to play with is the frequency parameter. This is pretty simple. It will make the pitch of the sound higher or lower. So I'm happy with that sound. I'm going to click the export button, and that will download a WAV file to my downloads folder. So I'll create a new folder called interface sounds in my sound design folder to keep things nice and organized. And I'll rename this sound button hover and then move that in there. So now I just want a click sound for when the user clicks on the button, and we can use the blip select again. I'll just try a couple things and get something that will sound good with the hover sound. And so that sounds pretty good for my button click sound. So I'll go ahead and export that and save it and put it in my folder as well. The next sound I want to create is the game over sound. I could try different things here, maybe the explosion or something like that, or I'll probably use the random default to just get some random sounds until I find something that works. For this, I just want a sound that kind of signifies to the player that they lost or the game is over. And that will go along with when they die or something happens that they lose the game. And depending on where your game is set, you might want to look for some samples, some pre-recorded sounds. You could go to freesound.org or OpenGameArt and look for some pre-recorded sounds there. And maybe you can find something that relates to the setting or the genre of your game. I kind of like the 8-bit style of sound, and so I like to kind of play around with these until I find something that works. But this could be a longer process than just looking for samples. That kind of makes sense. So for my game over sound, I'm gonna probably try something random, do some mutations, play around with some of the different parameters, and hopefully eventually I'll get something that sort of signifies or sounds like what I want for my game over. The mutate button is also very useful. If you get a sound that you like, but it's not quite right, you can click mutate and it will set some of the parameters randomly. So you'll get a version of the same sound, but with some differences. And you can also use the undo button to undo those mutations if it goes in a direction that you don't like. So I think that sounds pretty good. I'm gonna export that. I could probably spend hours playing with different sounds, but for the sake of the demo, let's just go with that one. So I'll export it, call it game over, and throw it into my sound effects folder. And now I have one more sound to create, the win game sound, or you win, or whatever you want to call it. And so I'll do the same kind of thing here. I'll just play with some different random sounds and some of the defaults, and then maybe play with some of the parameters. Again, it might be a little faster to just find a pre-recorded sample somewhere, but I like kind of playing around with this stuff. You can kind of get some different things and maybe find something that you like, but either approach is good. So I had to play around with a bunch of different stuff, but eventually I found a random sound that is maybe not perfect, but is good enough for communicating that you won the game. So I'm gonna go ahead and export that sound and rename it win game. And then I'll put that in my sound effects folder. And so I only have a few sound effects here, but I'm ready to put these into Godot. So you might have other things going on in your game that you want to create sound effects for, but I'm just gonna go ahead and show you how to put these sounds in. If you have a project that you're already working on, you can go ahead and open that. If you need something to start from, you can go to the lab page and download the sound default folder. This is just a folder that has a basic project in it with everything except the audio. And so you can put your own audio in here. And so if you're using the sound default, you can just drag that into your sound design folder and then grab your interface sounds and make a copy and throw it in there. And let's just rename this audio. You could also do the same thing with the game you're already working on. Just throw your sound effects in there into the audio folder. And so when we open up the game, we're gonna see this default scene. Let's start with our interface sounds, and we want to make sure that they are imported correctly. So these are all WAV files, so they all look like they have the right import settings, so we don't really have to do anything there, but it's always a good idea to check. And then let's start with our start menu. So you can see we have a bunch of buttons in there, and then we have some sounds that go along with those buttons. We have the hover sound and the click sound. And even though we have 3 buttons, we're gonna use the same sound for each one. So we just have to add the sound file into those 2 audio stream players, and then we're gonna connect our button events to the sounds in our code. So if you click on one of the buttons, like here's the start button, and then look in the nodes, you'll see the events that are related to that button. And this is a Godot built-in thing. So there's a bunch of events that Godot has defined for us that are common to how buttons work in video games. And we can use those to attach to our script. So let's go into our menu script and find the section with our button sounds. So we have function on button down, and we have click sound.play, and then on function on mouse entered, and so we have hover sound.play. And so those are the 2 events that will play our 2 sounds. And then we just have to make sure our nodes are connected. So if we go to the start button and double click on the signal for button down, it should take us to that event. And if we click on the signal for mouse entered, it should take us to the other event. And so if that's all hooked up right, you should be good to go. That should be part of the default setup for the sound default. If you're working on your own game, you might want to download the sound default or the asset folders and just grab those pre-built scenes. And so now we just have to add in the sounds to our audio stream player. So I'll click on my hover sound and then click on the stream empty and then find the sound that I want. And now that should be working. And then I'll click on the click sound and do the same thing. So now you see when we preview this scene, if I hover over the buttons, we get a nice little blip sound, and if I click, I get that select sound. And so if we have the start menu open, we want to open a scene. And so let's change the load level path. So instead of the default scene, let's load this UI scene. And the UI scene just has some stuff in there built in so we can test some things. And so when we click the button, we should see the UI scene. And you can see there are some user interface metrics in the top left corner, and there's a couple obstacles so we can test all the different sounds and events that we need to. So then we just have to add in these button sounds to the rest of our UI scenes. So let's open up Game Over, and you can see the structure is very similar to the start menu, and it even uses the same script. So we don't even have to open the script and go through uncommenting the code because it just reuses all that code. And so all we have to do is make sure that the correct sounds are loaded into the audio stream players for each one of these scenes. And that's pretty easy to do. We just click on each hover sound and click sound, and then click on the stream empty and load the sounds. So let's do that with the instruction scene. And we can also do that with the you win scene. The you win scene is like the game over scene. It's something that will appear on top of our game once we win the game, but it still has the same buttons and functionality as our menus. So we can test that real quick. We can see the sounds working there and the quit button works, so that looks good. So let's go into our UI scene and make sure that works. And so if I fall down and get the game over, my button sounds play, so that's great. Updating the code to play the game over sound and win game sound is very easy. We just have to go to the scene manager node and click on the script, and then we can scroll down a little bit, find the game over function, and you'll see game over sound.play is commented out. And that's to prevent errors if you haven't added the sound yet. And so we can just remove the comment hashtag from the beginning of that line and then find the win game sound, and that's all we have to do. So you can see the audio stream player for the game over sound and the win game sound inside of the scene manager node. The script that triggers those sounds is attached to the scene manager, so I thought that made more sense organizationally. So let's click on the game over sound and load the audio stream and just find gameover.wave, and we'll do the same thing with the win game sound. Just click on the stream and find the correct file, and those should be loaded in now. So we can go ahead and test all of that. Let's make sure that our start menu works, and if we go to the instructions menu, that should work as well. And the start button there doesn't go to the right scene, so we can just go and change the load level path. This isn't really necessary for this lab, but just to show how we will set everything up, we can go to the instruction scene and find the correct scene, and then we can test that. So again, starting at the start menu, click on the instructions button, and then click start, and we should go to the game. And now if we die, we hear that game over sound. So that sounds pretty good. And if we click the quit button, that works as well. And so all of that sounds pretty good. And so we can go ahead and do some documentation. So as usual, let's go to the Open Lab and add a new post. And look for the interface sounds category. And we can put in a little title. And then a short description, just talk about what you were going for with the audio, maybe how you created it, or if you sourced it, you could include links to where you got it from. And then we can just add in our sounds. And remember, to add a sound in OpenLab, you can't just drag it like you can an image. You have to first create an audio block, and then you can drag the sound onto the audio block. So we have our button click, our button hover, and let's add in our game over and win game sound. And this will be a good way to share with other students, and you can download these sounds directly from OpenLab. So if another student wants to collaborate and use the sounds that you created, they can use your post to download the sounds. So once you've added the sounds, let's preview in OpenLab. You can play the sounds, and you can also use the menu on each sound file to download, so you can share the files with other students. You can also zip up the sounds and send it on Discord or something like that. Whatever is easier. But that sounds pretty good, so let's go ahead and publish.